Hello TV fans, hello X-Files fans, I am bored now, back with you for another review of the X-Files, and this is going to be my review of the 7th episode of the 2nd season. It is simply called Free. This episode is directed by David Nutter, a reliable pair of hands, and it got roughly 15.0 in the Nelson rating, so a pretty strong hold from the previous weeks. This is the vampire one, and it's a much talked about episode in the X-Files fandom, not for positive reasons, I have to say. Many of the fans hate this episode and are really down on it, sort of put it down there as one of the low points of the show. It's also notable because there's no Scully in this episode, none at all. This is obviously at the point where Gillian Anderson had given birth or was about to give birth, so she wasn't available for the episode, and as a result they had to sort of knock this one up quite quick and sort of think on their feet. Could be wrong in saying this, but I think this could be the only episode in the X-Files where there is no Scully at all in it. I guess maybe technically you could say a certain season 4 episode, Musings of a Cigarette Man, or Cigarette Smoking Man, sorry, but you do at least hear a voice in that from what I can remember. It deserves the level of hate it gets. Middling, I think it's totally forgettable in many ways beyond one or two moments. It's very bland, I'll say. The best thing it has going for it is David Nutter as director, because once again he does come up with some striking visual moments. I like the way he captures the Hollywood Hills, for example. I like how he captures it in this sort of bright red sun, which is like a connection to the theme of blood and vampires in this episode. And there's definitely one or two striking moments like that. I like how he sort of captures the woman in this, the vampire, in silhouette sort of thing. So there is this sense of mystery and the darkness lurking. I like the idea of vampires and the Hollywood myth and stardom and that kind of thing. Notable then, the opening scene has this older man who's in on his wife with one of them. So it's almost like he's trying to recapture his youth in the same way as, or a similar way as, the vampires. Their ambition is trying to live forever. But here's the problem with these vampires in the episode. There's just so bland and stereotypical and cliched. I mean, they sort of come across as the Lost Boys. They're going for that sort of vibe. One of them in particular, who's captured at one point by Mulder, he just looks and sort of talks like a grungy punk rock version of a vampire. I mean, to be honest, they might as well have cast early Chris Jericho, WCW Chris Jericho, Lionheart Chris Jericho to have played that part. It's sort of what it comes off as. And it's just completely wasted. I mean, they go for the most sort of basic and generic version of a vampire. So they set up pretty decent ideas, pretty solid themes. As I said, the whole Hollywood connection with vampires, but they never really do anything interesting or original with it. And you have Mulder at some point describing them as a cult-like subculture. And that's also something that they never really do anything original or interesting in. Ultimately, I think what this episode feels like is, it feels like they wanted to do a vampire episode just because that ticks a box, because it's something they haven't explored before. And in the end, maybe partly because they had to rush it and think on their feet because of Gillian Anderson, but in the end they just don't do a very convincing or interesting job with it. I think the guest stars are kind of forgettable, and there's some bad acting in there, some clunky dialogue. Even who, as I said at one point, gets arrested, who is just so OTT, and the lines he's given are just really bad. Line of the episode, classic Mulder wit. Don't you want to live forever? And Mulder says, well, not if drew string pants or something like that. I'm gonna make a comeback. And that's a classic, like, Mulder and David Duchovny delivery. So that was a great bit of dialogue and reaction scene. But pretty much outside of that, the scene with him and this vamp kind of sucks. There's some cliche dialogue. He rambles on. There's no heaven. There's no soul. Just rot and decay. So stuff like that. It's absolutely nonsense. And the problem with is that the script at times is quite rambling. It's overindulgent, and because it sort of feeds them really bad sort of cliche lines, then it just doesn't work. And there's sections where it is very boring. So a lot of the interest does come through David Nutter and his direction and his visual direction, but I think even that's restricted because of where the episode goes. Just don't believe Mulder's change in personality in this. They tried to paint him as a guy who's obviously lost, him as someone who would be drawn in by this world, by this, you know, vampiric sort of world, to the dark side. Obviously you get like a cameo from Perry Reeves, who was at the time David Duchovny's girlfriend. She plays, well, she's not a vamp at first in the episode, but she has a connection to them, and she's sort of grown up with them, and she's drawn to the dark side. But I think ultimately her sort of arc is that she's kind of wants out. Then Duchovny, or Mulder, sorry, sort of shows her like the light in a way and shows her a different possibility. But she's like a murky character. She's sort of caught between the two. People say her and Duchovny have weak chemistry. I think it's okay. I don't think it's too bad, but it's just the romance is very forced and cliched and not something I believe in. Because there's certain plots in the X-Files where they try to convince you that either Mulder or Scully have been like seduced into this sort of way of life, or into, I think, just being drawn towards like a character. Sometimes you believe it, sometimes you don't. This is definitely an example where I don't believe it. For some reason, Mulder doesn't believe that they're vampires, and is because it's a way to create drama or try to create tension, because much confirm that it is vampires. You know, I mean, some X-Files episode you get a strong like opening and it'll hit you and there'll be suspense and you won't quite know where exactly it's going. But in this case there is no suspense. It's pretty obvious from the opening that we are dealing in vampires, to make Mulder kind of skeptical, where he doesn't believe. With all the stuff you've seen Mulder and with the sort of character he is, why wouldn't he jump to these are vampires or believe that they're vampires? And I guess there's this thing, this might be part of the problem with the episode for some people, because it sort of introduces something which is a little bit outside of the X-Files lore at this point, and it doesn't really bother me. It's just an overall, I don't think it was very interesting, and they didn't really do anything that fresh with, well, they didn't do anything fresh with it. The sort of forced romance and Mulder's character's changes is unconvincing for me, and there's some quite generic 80s action movie style action scenes, and the ending is a bit of a muddled ending to, oh, it is quite generic. I disagree with the people who say it's a total stinker and one of the worst. I mean, I guess up to this point in the show it may be one of the worst, but it's certainly not a total loss, I don't think. So I'm going to give it a 5.5 out of 10. That sounds about right. I will return with the return of Scully. She only misses one episode, yeah. She comes back in another big episode for the season, and that will be One Breath. So that will be my review next week. So if you want to catch up with that during the week, then please do, and join me for my thoughts next week. Before I go, the chance to promote some other things on the channel. But to this, I guess, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I'm also in season 2 of that. About halfway through the second season. Shows I do The Handmaid's Tale, so I've been reviewing season 4 of that, the most recent season. And just looking at movie type reviews that may be similar to this, me and Rachel McDonald have recently started reviewing a horror movie on this channel together, and we've done a few weeks. We've looked at certain franchises, and one we've started just this week is the Halloween franchise. So in the run-up to Halloween Kills being released at the end of October, we will be watching and reviewing all 11 of the previous Halloween movies. So we started that this week with Carpenter's 78 original. So that review is up on the channel now if you're a Halloween fan and want to check that out. So for classic horror franchises and movie reviews, I think that's the place to be, joining me and Rachel every week for those reviews. And I'll be back next week with more X-Files. Thanks guys, see you again.